My new friend treated my daughter like her own until I learned the terrifying truth. I thought Grace was my savior until I noticed how much her daughter looked like me. Then, a nurse whispered a secret that made my blood run cold, and nothing in my life was ever the same again. The late afternoon sun bathed the hospital park in a warm golden glow, but I felt no warmth on my skin. Every inch of me was tired, exhausted from another round of chemotherapy, the kind of tiredness that no amount of sleep could fix. My muscles ached and my mind was foggy. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to comfort the deep exhaustion that felt like a weight around my chest. Sophie was a few feet away, playing in the grass, her small hands gathering acorns with a determination that brought a faint smile to my face. She looked up at me, her bright eyes filled with excitement. "Mom, look!" she called out, holding up a handful of acorns in her tiny palms. "I'm making a tiny house for the squirrels." I nodded, proud of her creativity despite the exhaustion. That weighed on me. "That's very kind of you. I'm sure the squirrels will love it," I said, my voice soft but warm, my heart swelling with love for the little girl who had brought so much light into my life. She giggled, the sound like music to my ears, and turned back to her task, carefully stacking twigs on top of the acorns to create a roof for her miniature house. I watched her, every fiber of my being aching to join her in the moment, but too drained to move. Still, I found comfort in knowing she was happy and content, even if I couldn't give her the energy she deserved from me. It was then that I heard the sound of laughter, a burst of joy that cut through my tired haze. I looked up just in time to see a little girl with curly hair darting across the gravel path, her shoes kicking up tiny stones as she ran. Behind her, a woman moved with a graceful, effortless stride. Her presence was calm, collected, and oddly comforting. When she saw me watching, she smiled and walked toward me, her eyes kind but curious. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice polite with a touch of warmth. "Is that your daughter?" "Yes," I replied, glancing at Sophie for a moment before turning back to the woman. There was something about the way she looked at Sophie, something I couldn't quite place, but it tugged at me in a way I didn't understand. The woman's smile deepened as she looked at Sophie, her gaze lingering for a moment too long. "She looks just like you," she remarked, the words carrying a sense of wonder, as if something about Sophie's appearance struck a chord with her. I wasn't sure how to respond. I simply nodded and forced a polite smile. But inside, something shifted. Sophie had never looked like me. Not really. She didn't have the same eyes, the same smile, or the same face that I recognized in the mirror. She didn't look like her father either. Her features were a mystery to me, something I had never been able to piece together. "My daughter is about the same age," the woman continued, as though trying to make small talk. "We come here often after her therapy sessions. It helps her unwind." "Therapy?" I asked, curious, though part of me already felt uneasy about this conversation. "Yes, speech therapy," the woman answered, brushing off the mention casually. "Nothing major, just some help with articulation." She extended her hand to me. "I'm Grace," she said, introducing herself. "And that little whirlwind over there is Adele." "Sarah," I replied, shaking her hand, still feeling a bit uneasy. "I visited a speech therapist as a kid too. Brings back memories," I added, trying to make light of the situation. Grace chuckled softly, though there was something about it that felt rehearsed. "Nice to meet you, Sarah," she said, then glanced at Sophie before turning back to me, almost as though something was on the tip of her tongue. "If you ever need help with your daughter," she said suddenly, her voice laced with sincerity, "I'd be happy to offer it." I wasn't sure how to react, so I simply blinked. "Sorry," I said, confused by the offer. "I mean it," she said smoothly, reaching into her coat pocket and pulling out a sleek business card. She held it between her fingers and offered it to me. "I have time, I have resources, but I don't have many friends." Her voice softened with a hint of vulnerability. "Maybe we could, change that?" Her words caught me off guard. There was something refreshingly honest about the way she spoke, like a woman who was genuinely trying to make a connection. It was almost disarming. "And I know how hard things can get," she added, her voice gentle, as if she understood more than she was letting on. I didn't know how to respond. Grace seemed genuine, but there was something in her words that didn't sit quite right. Still, I hesitated for only a moment before replying, "That's very kind of you." Before I could say anything else, Grace turned to Adele, who had flopped onto the grass, clearly unwilling to leave just yet. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's go home," Grace called. Adele groaned dramatically, her voice filled with mock frustration. "Ugh, 5 more minutes. 2, Grace bargained, her tone light and teasing. "Then we go home." I stood there watching as Grace ushered Adele away. As they left, I looked down at the business card she had given me, turning it over in my hand. At that moment, it was nothing more than a polite gesture and offer of help from a stranger who, for some reason, seemed to understand more than I did. Little did I know, that simple card would mark the beginning of a chain of events that would change everything. Over the next few months, Grace became a regular part of our lives. At first, it felt like a blessing. I was weak from my treatments, barely able to keep up with daily tasks. Grace stepped in without hesitation. She picked Sophie up from school, brought her over to play with Adele, and even made meals for me when I couldn't muster the strength to cook. "Don't argue," she would say whenever I tried to protest. "Let me do this, Sarah. You need to focus on getting better." I was grateful, truly. But as the days passed, I began to feel something else, a creeping sense of dependence. She didn't just help with the little things. She paid for Sophie's school fees without asking. "It's nothing, really," she would say with a warm smile when I tried to thank her. "Just let me do this for you." She showered Sophie with gifts, new toys, designer clothes, and even a small tablet, explaining that Adele had one too, and they liked to match. At first, I told myself it was nothing more than her generosity, that she was simply trying to help. But something about it felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that Grace was doing more than just offering help. She was slowly taking over parts of my life, pieces of Sophie's life that I had once controlled. The more she did, the more I felt like I was losing control. One afternoon, as the girls played in the living room, I watched Adele more closely than usual. She was sitting, cross-legged on the floor, absorbed in a book, Anne of Green Gables, my favorite childhood book. But there was something strange in the way she read it. It wasn't just that she knew the words. It was the way she read them, exactly the same way I had when I was her age. She paused at the right moments, raised her voice in excitement at the right places, just as I had done so many years ago. And then, I saw Adele absent-mindedly twirling a strand of her dark hair around her finger as she read. My heart clenched. I did that. I always did that when I was deep in thought. I had always had that habit. I sat there watching her, my mind racing. Her dimpled cheeks, the way her nose scrunched when she concentrated, even the shape of her smile, so familiar, like a ghost from my past. That night, after Grace had gone home, I found myself sitting in the kitchen with a sense of unease tightening in my chest. My thoughts were racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Grace had been so kind, so helpful, but now I wondered, why? The following week, I had another surgery. When I woke up in the hospital, the world around me was hazy and disoriented. My body felt heavy, and my throat was dry. As I blinked, trying to make sense of the blurry world around me, I saw a nurse standing beside my bed, adjusting my IV drip. "Have you decided what you will do?" she asked softly, her voice oddly distant. "What?" I whispered, confused. The nurse hesitated, looking around the room nervously before speaking again. "No one has informed you?" she asked, almost as though she didn't believe it. "Informed me about what?" I croaked. "There was a mistake at the hospital, years ago. Your child was accidentally switched at birth," the nurse explained, her voice barely audible. The words hit me like a punch. The air seemed to disappear from the room. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. My thoughts scrambled. My heart pounded in my chest. "Sophie, isn't my daughter?" I managed to whisper, my voice shaking. The nurse nodded, her eyes filled with sympathy. "The whole hospital is talking about it." The words felt like they were spinning in my head. Sophie wasn't my biological daughter, was she? And Adele was my daughter? Or had she always been? I couldn't wrap my head around it. The world around me felt unreal, like I was in a nightmare that I couldn't wake from. Days later, I found myself standing outside Grace's house. It wasn't just a house. It was an estate, a massive home with a gated driveway, perfectly manicured lawns, and all the signs of wealth and privilege. I hesitated before ringing the doorbell, my stomach twisting into knots. When the door opened, Grace greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sarah, come in," she said, her voice smooth and controlled. I stepped inside, my heart pounding. The house smelled faintly of vanilla and something expensive, like designer perfume or candles I couldn't afford. It felt too perfect, too pristine, for what I had just learned. I turned to Grace as soon as the door closed behind me. "You knew?" I asked, my voice trembling. Grace didn't flinch. "Yes," she said calmly, "and I have for a long time." My blood ran cold. I stepped back. "You knew this whole time? And you never told me?" Grace sighed as if she were explaining something simple to a child. "The doctor called me first. He told me about the mistake. The moment I saw Sophie, I knew. It was obvious." She exhaled deeply. "So I decided to act." "Act?" My voice was shaking with anger. "What does that mean?" She moved across the room to the bar cart, poured herself a glass of water, and took a sip, as though we were simply discussing business. "I told the doctor not to inform you. I said I'd handle it myself. My stomach turned. You paid him, didn't you? Yes, she said calmly, as though it was a mere detail. I felt a sharp, bitter laugh escape me. And that was your brilliant plan? Keep me in the dark forever? Grace tilted her head, considering my words. I didn't tell you right away because I couldn't just take my daughter away from the only mother she had ever known. But I also couldn't walk away without meeting my own. I felt my heart break as the pieces fell into place. You were trying to replace me, I whispered. Grace didn't seem offended. She simply nodded. You've been struggling, Sarah. And I have the means to make things easier for you. Her voice softened as she reached into a drawer and pulled out a checkbook. I'll pay for everything. Your treatment, your recovery, even a new home. A fresh start. My hands balled into fists. As long as I step aside, I whispered. She met my gaze, her expression unreadable. This is just business, Sarah. I took a step back, my heart racing. This is my life, Grace, and I want you to stay away from my daughter. As you wish, Grace replied smoothly, without a hint of emotion in her voice. I stood there, stunned, struggling to breathe. The world around me had crumbled into something unrecognizable. I stepped outside, gasping for air, my chest heaving as if I had been holding my breath for far too long. The next few weeks were a blur of emotions. Sophie would ask every day when she could see Adele again, and each time I would fumble for an answer. My heart broke each time. I had no idea how to tell her the truth, and I wasn't sure I even knew what that truth was. I spent sleepless nights pacing the house, my mind spinning. Finally, one night, unable to sleep, I sat down at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and pen. I poured my thoughts onto the page, trying to make sense of everything. When the letter was finished, I folded it carefully and slipped it into an envelope. The next morning, I sent it off. The following day, I opened the door to find Grace standing there, holding the letter in her hand. I assume you read it? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She nodded, then took a deep breath before speaking. You didn't say anything. I haven't thought about myself. We stood there in silence for a long moment, each of us waiting for the other to speak. Finally, Grace broke the silence. How do you imagine this working? She asked. I took a deep breath, knowing that the next words I spoke would shape everything that came after. We both need to be there for our daughters. It won't be easy, and we'll have to take things slowly. But if we rush, we could hurt them. Grace's fingers tapped lightly on the table as she thought about my words. Finally, she spoke again. What if we moved closer? There's a house for sale on the next street. My husband could buy it. The girls could see each other every day, and we could both be there for them. I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. That actually sounds like a good idea. Months passed. My health slowly improved, and so did the tension between Grace and me. We began to put aside our differences, focusing on what was best for Sophie and Adele. Slowly but surely, we found a way to make it work. What began as an impossible situation eventually became something we could both accept. Through all the confusion and pain, we learned to compromise, to work together. And in doing so, we both realized that, for the sake of the girls, we were stronger together than apart. The girls' laughter filled our lives again, louder than before. And somewhere along the way, Grace and I stopped being rivals. We became friends, partners in a sense, working for the happiness and well-being of the girls who had brought us together in ways we never could have predicted.